Okay, Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
Alaikum salam.
Welcome to this webinar on Islamophobia, Muslims in Europe and the USA. Thank you so much for joining us. I can see that the room is still filling up, so welcome, come and join us. We have a wonderful discussion ready for you today with an incredible panel of speakers who will be speaking to us about their understanding, their view, their perspective on Islamophobia across the world. To discuss this very critical subject, we have four speakers for you today. Let me take you through the wonderful contributors. Kicking off with none other than Zara Mohammed. Some of you will know Zara. She's a master's graduate in human rights law and a training and development consultant. She was elected the first female, first Scot and youngest Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Britain in February 2021 and re-elected last month for a second term. For those of you who know the MCB historically, you'll know what big of a change that was. She is passionate and about community change, empowering young people and improving diversity and inclusion, both within her communities and beyond. Since her election, Zara has spoken on key issues impacting British Muslims across mainstream media and publications, and she was a keynote speaker at the G20 Interfaith Summit. Zara, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us. Next up, we have Mustafa Briggs. Mustafa is a graduate of Arabic and International Relations from the University of Westminster, whose dissertation focused on Arabic literature and literacy in West Africa. Mustafa started an MA in translation at SOAS University in London with a specialization in Arabic and Islamic texts before going on to Al-Azhar University in Cairo, Egypt, where he is currently doing another degree in Islamic studies and Arabic. Mustafa rose to international acclaim for his Beyond Bilal Black History in Islam lecture series, which if you haven't seen, you absolutely should check out. And that saw him explore and uncover the deep-rooted relationship between Islam and Black history and the legacy of contemporary African Islamic scholarship and its role in the international relations of the Muslim world, as well as the vital role of female scholarship, which it has played in the West African Islamic tradition. And he's presented on these topics at over 30 universities across 3 continents, including Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, and Yale. Welcome, Mustafa. Thank you so much for being with us. Next up, we have Emel Oz Firker, who is joining us from Germany. Emel is a Muslim German educator based out of near Hanover. After 12 years of experience in the tourism industry as a senior manager, she decided to switch to education. She's now teaching economics at the vocational college in Peine, Germany, and has been living in Germany since 1994. Welcome, Emel. And last, but of course, certainly not least, we have Imam Shamsi Ali, who is a well-known religious scholar and interfaith bridge builder in New York and beyond. Now, currently, Imam Ali is the director and Imam Jamaica Muslim Center, or I should say at the Jamaica Muslim Center, and president of Nusantara Foundation, a non-profit focusing on building peace and harmony between peoples of diverse backgrounds. Imam Ali has been awarded largely for his tireless efforts promoting understanding and cooperation between religious communities, and he was chosen as one of the 7 most influential NYC religious leaders by New York Magazine in 2007, and one of the 500 most influential Muslims in the world by Jordan Strategic Studies and George Washington University. Welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for being on this panel. I appreciate your time. Thank you to all of you who are joining us from across the world today for this discussion on Islamophobia, Muslims in Europe and the USA. I thought it might be interesting to go through each speaker and have you give us a little sense of what Islamophobia looks like from where you're standing today, with a little bit of a kind of retrospective on the evolution of discussions around it and the way in which it's currently manifesting in the societies that you're living in. I wonder whether we might kick off with you, Emel.
Sure. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. When Kaisra approached me for this panel, I did not even check my availability in my time planner. I accepted her invitation right away because of the importance of the topic. Please kindly note that I'm not an expert in this topic. I'm a Muslim Turkish woman working as a teacher in Germany. So I decided to pick topics from the context of school life or professional life. They are based on my personal exposure to Islamophobia, as well as the experiences reported by the people I know, I work with, or I have encountered. I understand Islamophobia as indiscriminate negative attitudes or emotions directed at Islam or Muslims. So how does this take place in Germany? Muslims in Germany face discrimination in many areas, including the job and the housing markets, education, and healthcare. There are various studies reporting about Islamophobia. The most recent one in 2021 shows that 732 Islamophobic crimes were recorded, as well as 54 attacks on Muslim institutions and representatives. Muslim institutions being mostly the mosque in various places in Germany. This is a very high number, and this is a growing number. When we look back the records in the past, this is a tremendous growth. We're seeing the number of attacks as well as the crimes. The country has witnessed growing racism and Islamophobia in recent years, mainly fueled by the propaganda of far-right groups and parties, as well as the media, unfortunately, which have exploited the refugee crisis and attempted to stoke fear of immigrants. The most recent research by the German Center for Integration and Migration Research from December 22, very, very new, show that the instances of discrimination against Muslims and those perceived as Muslim often go unnoticed. This is tragic. Growing numbers, the number of people affected by this phenomena, yet these often go unnoticed. The same study also shows that people are more likely to detect racism if the given text, for example, in a study, refer to Black or Jewish people rather than Muslims. There are reasons for this. As a teacher, I would say that the strong public condemnation of anti-Semitism and racism against people of color, but first and mostly due to the historic awareness regarding Holocaust, colonialism, and slavery. These are the main reasons. Very often and regularly, topics are taught at schools from these subject areas. We still lack awareness of racism and discrimination Muslims face in German society. Maybe just a brief information about where we're standing with, facts and figures in Germany to start with, how it looks in Germany from this side.
Thank you.
Would this be something to start with, Myriam?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that really threw us into it, and there's so many issues I want to come back to you on. Let's head over to Mustafa to find out a little bit about how things are looking from his perspective.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين. Alhamdulillah. In terms of speaking about my experience with Islamic phobia, it's going to be an interesting one, because even though I do come from the UK and I grew up in the UK, for the past 4 years I've been living in Cairo, Egypt. And so in Cairo, it's 95% Muslim, I believe. So I'm not really experiencing any Islamophobia there. But what's interesting for me growing up as a Black Muslim in the UK is that I never really had direct experience of Islamophobia, just because of the way that I phenotypically present. Most people don't assume I am Muslim or associate me with Islam, because as Myriam would probably know, being a white Muslim convert, as a Black Muslim in Britain, Islamophobia, I feel, is stereotyped towards people of Asian and Middle Eastern descent. And so, whereas people who are visibly Arab or Asian, who wear hijab, who have beards, etc., experience Islamophobia, and we even have examples of people who are not even Muslims, such as people who are Sikhs, just because they wear turbans and have beards and present similar to the stereotypical image of what a Muslim looks like, experience Islamophobia. For me, I haven't really experienced Islamophobia directly, even though I'm part of the Muslim community and I've been privy to other people's experiences and other people's lived realities of facing Islamophobia. And so that is from one side. And then also from another side, as a Black Muslim, there is Islamophobia within the Black community sometimes. And that is a result of neo-Orientalist propaganda that Islam was spread by the sword in Africa and was imposed on people of African descent. And so my response to that was always educating people through my work, through Beyond Bilal, and through the different lectures that I do about the history of Islam in Africa and in the Black world, essentially, and the fact that for many West Africans, Islam has been present in West Africa or in Sub-Saharan Africa for over 1,000 years. And it was peaceful interaction and clerical lineages that spread Islam amongst West Africans, and they accepted Islam similar to the way that Islam was spread in Indonesia and in Malaysia and in the subcontinent, and rather than it being an Arabic conquest of Africa that led to Africans becoming Muslim. And so, yeah, that's my personal experience. I'd love to talk more about it as the presentation goes on, because I'm currently writing my second book, and my second book looks at the link between all of the different struggles that we face in the world in terms of communities and minorities. So I'll go into it a bit more later, but essentially there is a link between the clash of civilizations, East versus West, that was happening before the transatlantic slave trade in Europe, a link between the fall of the Roman Empire and the capture of Constantinople, and the transatlantic slave trade and the fall of Granada. So there's like a link between Islamophobia and anti-Blackness and colonization that a lot of us don't make, that I'm kind of writing about in my new book. So when it's time to come back, inshallah, I'll discuss a bit more about that.
Wow, we definitely need to circle back to that one. Thank you so much, Mustafa, for that opener on your end. Imam Shamsi, can I hand Shamsi Ali, excuse me, may I hand over to you? Just so you know, we can't currently hear you because you're muted. And you're back.
Thank you very much. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. I would like to begin by mentioning what I have sent to some of you, that on December 29th, the Brookings Institute released a survey, and it said that compared to 2016, the Americans' view on Islam had become more positive, up to 78%. Compared to 2016, it was only 57%. Certainly, as a Muslims living in the United States, and particularly in New York City, where the 9/11 tragic event happened, and since then we experienced tremendous phobia and some abuses, even physical abuses, happen here in the city and around the nation. That's a great news. But what happened on the 31st of December 2022, a young man claimed to be a convert, 19 years old, Caucasian from Maine state, attacked 2 police officers in Times Square during the celebrations of New Year. So you can imagine eyes from all over the world turned to Times Square watching that particular event, and something happened. A young guy claimed to be a Muslim attacked 2 police officers. So by the following morning, I opened up the internet and tried to look the news, and every headline says Muslim extremists, Islamic extremism, and so on and so forth. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this because we are at war. And I'm not talking about Ukraine versus Soviet Union or Russia here, but I'm talking about the war of perception. And this is the most dangerous war that ever we are facing as Muslims in terms of trying to, not to prove, because we don't have to prove ourselves, but trying to tell the world that we are not threat to anybody. But this is the perception is being built, that Muslims are threat. And I think if you go back to our religion, and taking this into our theological perspective, it is not something new. This is an ongoing basis. And the Quran told us that, you know, حَسِبَ النَّاسُ أَنْ يُتْرَكُوا أَنْ يَقُولُوا آمَنَّا وَهُمْ لَا يُفْتَنُونَ. You know, we are going to be tested. We are going to be challenged. And I think the challenge here is a part of that heavenly law. We call it Sunnatullah, heavenly law. And every prophet that had come had been challenged. From Adam alayhi salatu salam to Nuh alayhi salatu salam by Al-Malak, by the leaders of his own people. Ibrahim was challenged by Namrud, Musa by Fir'aun, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam by Abu Lahab, Abu Jahl. So that is a natural part of our way in conveying the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But all these are worsened by certainly media, who always, you know, not fair in treating the Muslims. When that happens, or the Times Square incident happened, there were 2 other mass shootings took place in the United States. One in Florida, and the other one is in Georgia. 3 people got killed. But none of those perpetrators' religious affiliations were mentioned, except that a guy who attacked 2 police officers in Times Square. So that is the way media perpetrate our religion. Politicians. We in America experienced Donald Trump as the president of this country, and certainly the ignorance about the faith. And that is our challenge as Muslims, how to educate Americans. But also don't forget that we Muslims oftentimes also contribute to these situations. And I can say, you know, based on my own personal experience, that possibly more than 60% of Islamophobia is caused by our failure as Muslims to represent the true face of Al-Islam. And particularly for us, those, you know, living in the Western society, so-called Western society, I think we need to push more the process of integration, not assimilation, but integration. In other words, that we have to take part in the mainstream public life. Recently in America, there's a midterm election, and alhamdulillah, thank God that we have 83 Muslims elected into different levels of public positions, city council, mayors, and others. And I think it's a good news. This is contributing into that positive view of Americans toward Al-Islam. So a lot of things to do, and a lot of, you know, challenges and responsibilities that we have to carry on our shoulder, but I'm sure and optimistic that we are going to prevail. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Imam Shamsi Ali, for that. Zara, over to you.
Okay, thank you, everyone, and good afternoon. And thank you, Myriam, for such a wonderful introduction. And to Macfest for the invitation as well. I think it's really good to begin with a bit of context. So I'm going to be speaking from the British Muslim community's experience. So my role as Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Britain is we're operating at a national level and really looking at how does Islamophobia impact everyday life, our politics, even how we engage and how we're part of civil society. So I think, you know, to give you some perspective, you know, we saw from the recent census that the number of Muslims in this country has increased to 6.5% of the population. And we know of that number, 50% of British Muslims are under the age of 25. So I myself, for example, I'm 3rd generation. So whilst there's more of us here, and you could argue we're more integrated, we're across all fields and sectors, we've got political representation, we still continue to be on the news, but even particularly during COVID, the conversation around Islam and Muslims, you know, it has been changing, and even my own election and all the kind of surrounding news and publication. My point being is, whilst we've been here longer, we're more integrated and we've shifted generationally. If you look at the statistics of hate crime, we've also found that the government's own statistics on Islamophobia and religiously motivated hate crime found that 42% of all of that was targeting Islam and Muslims. So there's more of us, we're more integrated than we've ever been, yet there's been a spike in hate crime and particular targeting of Muslims. Now we're a long way, you know, well, I think it was we've marked 20 years since 9/11. And we've kind of, I guess many young people today are saying, well, why is the conversation on Islam and Muslims at a national and political level not changing? And why is it we're finding that whilst I might be born here, educated here, I'm still struggling to institutionally move forward or progress? So why is it that Muslim women, visibly Muslim women, are the most marginalized when it comes to employment? Why is it Muslim women in politics face the most rampant targeted abuse? At the most senior level, you know, we found allegations of Islamophobia in cabinet by Nusrat Ghani from the Conservative Party. And if we park that, then also let's look at the media. The MCB Centre for Media Monitoring analysed over 60,000 pieces of print, press, and media, and found that 60% of that was negative in its portrayal of Islam and Muslims. And we see that in the different coverage when it comes to news stories, the portrayal of Muslims and Islam. And I think when we think about, well, and also if we look at the global context, so Islamophobia in some ways is very rampant, and it's not just at a physical, verbal, abusive level, but at an institutional level. So much so that we've been advocating for a definition, and we can't even get agreement on that. So much so that our counterterrorism policy and the recently revealed, you know, review on Prevent found that they want to focus more on Islamist terrorism. And so Islam and Muslims continue to be politicized. I myself, when I was elected, which would be considered, oh great, this is a big news story, very positive, first female Secretary General, was faced a very, very negative reaction from some parts of the media. Very famous interview in Women's Hour. And the whole idea was, again, I was stereotyped and, you know, putting these tropes. And I'm thinking, well, isn't this a really good positive step? Yet you're still trying to frame me in this negative paradigm. And after a week of it and being asked lots of different questions on what do you think of this and what do you think of that, I thought, gosh, haven't we really moved on? You know, why are we still being framed in this other, outsider, alien, oppressed, whatever you want to call it? And, you know, there was a study by Birmingham University looking at attitudes and perceptions of Islam and Muslims. And, you know, of those that participated in that study, 33% believe that equal opportunities have gone too far when it comes to Muslims. 43% were concerned if a mosque is built near them. And 47% would not be willing to accept Muslims as members of their family. So we still have a deep-seated fear of Islam and Muslims. The MCB, one of the projects we do is Visit My Mosque. So we had over 220 mosques open their doors because to this day, we have members of the public that have never met a Muslim. And their only impression of us is through the lens of a media and a bad news story. And when I've, you know, part of my role, I've traveled across the country. And what I find is that even young people, particularly young boys and girls at schools, in particular a school in Manchester, there was a young girl who put her hand up and you asked, you know, what are you worried about? She said, oh, I'm really stressed out. She was only 8. I said, well, what have you got to be stressed out about? And everybody kind of laughed. But her teacher said that when they go to school, when they wear their headscarves, they face verbal abuse. So whilst in some ways we're able to engage in society more than we've ever been able to before, on the other hand, we still have this insidious Islamophobia that continues to permeate and in some ways block our full participation. And that's the way political parties behave. That's from the top right to the bottom, to your ability to get a job, to the way the media portrays you, to even your confidence as a young person to believe you can do anything you want. So I'll stop there, inshallah, and just hopefully give a bit of perspective on these different sides of the experience.
Thank you so much, Zara, and thank you to all our participants for those really insightful comments. I wanted to pick up at just about on a few of those to move on to the next question for me, which is the why. You know, we've touched on what it looks like and what it feels like, and we've touched on trends across different societies. But I think there's often a kind of very facile why of, you know, well, there's terrorism, so there's Islamophobia. And I suspect there may be a lot more to that story. Those of you who know me know I do have an opinion on this, but it's not my time. So I just would love to kind of explore with you the why of Islamophobia. We obviously know that, you know, Zara, you touched on this idea of a kind of deep-seated fear of Islam and Muslims, and I'm conscious also of Imam Shamsi talking about this sort of war of perception and perception of Muslims as being somehow dangerous, of being a threat. A lot of this obviously tends to be pinned on, you know, the acts of groups like Al-Qaeda or ISIS. But it does feel to me that as Muslims, we've spent decades kind of being really clear on, you know, the fact that these don't represent our views, that, you know, how many Muslims have also been actually killed by ISIS. In fact, the majority of victims of ISIS have been Muslims. You know, at what point does the sort of blurring that we as different communities across the world have been sort of trying really hard to make clear as distinct, maybe not audible, and what are the reasons why it might not be audible? I'm really kind of interested in hearing what the panel thinks of the whys of the state of Islamophobia today. Mustafa, can I throw that over to you to kick off? Maybe for a little bit of the historical perspective, because you did touch on that, and I think it could really help ground the conversation.
Yeah, so essentially in my research that I've been doing, I found it really interesting that for many of us, we think of Islamophobia possibly in Europe or in the Western world as something that's extremely new, or the result of 9/11 or the result of Al-Qaeda. But even if you go back to as far as, you know, the 1400s and the 1500s, Islamophobia has been deeply ingrained in the formation of the Western world. Just because, and I gave two examples earlier, the fall of Granada and the fall of Constantinople. So if we think about Europe back in the pre-modern period, the most powerful entity that existed was the Roman Empire, which stretched from Britain and Spain and Portugal, etc., in the West, all the way into Turkey and what we consider the Middle East today. Lebanon, Syria, Palestine were all parts of the Roman Empire. Any of us who've seen or listened to any of the nativity plays, etc., will remember that baby Jesus was born when Palestine was under Roman occupation. And so this continued until the Roman Empire split into the Eastern Roman Empire and the Western Roman Empire. The remnants of the Western Roman Empire, under the influence of the Catholic Church, became different kind of kingdoms and different principalities, but the Eastern Roman Empire continued into the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it's even mentioned in the Quran. There's a surah of the Quran named Ar-Rum, after the Eastern Roman Empire, because of the influence that they had in the Middle East. And it was the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's last military expedition to conquer the Roman Empire, essentially, because he sent a letter of peace and a letter of, you know, goodwill to the Caesar of the Roman Empire at the time, who ended up killing some of his companions. And so because of that, that's when the Muslims went to war with the Eastern Roman Empire and defeated them. And that's when Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, etc., all became part of the Muslim world, as well as Egypt, that was under Roman rule at the time as well. And so after that, we continue to see this battle now between them, the West and the Arabs, who are taking over all these previous territories that were part of the Roman Empire. And then in the 1400s, we see 1453 to be exact, the fall of Constantinople, which was the capital of the Roman Empire, and that is now today known as Istanbul. And so that shook Europe. And obviously we know as well the history of the Crusades and all of the things that were happening there, where they were trying to recapture Jerusalem from Muslim control. So when Constantinople falls, that sends a shockwave of fear of Muslims throughout Europe, because this is their last symbolic capital, and it has fallen to Western powers. At that time, Paris wasn't a thing. London wasn't a thing. The most powerful European city was Constantinople, which was Istanbul. It was the center of trade. It was the center of culture. It was the center of civilization. And so when that falls, we see then the Romans and the Pope in Rome starts to issue these papal bulls, these edicts. They're kind of the Catholic versions of a fatwa that are saying that it's upon European kings, specifically King Alfonso of Portugal or Spain, to enslave Muslims and conquer the Muslim world in revenge for what's going on with Muslims conquering the West. And this leads to Spain and Portugal traveling into not only North Africa, which they know as being Muslim, but West Africa, because we know that they knew about Mansa Musa, they knew about the West African Muslim empires that entered there. And so we start to see Portuguese people, Spanish people going into West Africa, and the first slaves are captured and taken to Portugal in 1444. So the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade and the beginning of colonization itself begins as an Islamophobic project, as a war against Islam. And this is something that we never even think of. So when we think about slavery, when we think about the African-American diaspora, when we think about all of these things, the formation of the Caribbean as we know it, and South America and North America as we know it, all of this was based on Islamophobia. Not only that, but the West is now looking for new ways to reach Asia and trade with Asia without having to go through the Ottoman territories. And so they have to look for new routes to the East, which leads them to, in 1492, discovering the New World. So in fact, even the discovery of America was based on Islamophobia. They were trying to avoid going through Muslim territory and paying taxes to Muslims. And so that's when they traveled west instead of east and ended up discovering the Caribbean and discovering the Americas. So all of these things form a backdrop for us to realize the situation that we find ourselves in today. So I feel like it's very difficult for us to undo centuries of friction, centuries of trauma, centuries of bias that is passed down from generation to generation, when the actual foundations of our society, the fact that colonization existed, the fact that most of the Muslim world was put under Western control, the fact that the transatlantic slave trade and all of these things stem from this kind of clash of civilizations between the East and the West, or between the Muslim world and the non-Muslim world. And so when we, as people who were previously colonized, previously subjugated, had been defeated for a time and are creeping back into Western society, visibly Muslim, wearing our hijabs, wearing our beards, proudly, you know, who we are, and in the territories that we were never given privilege to be in before, it is scary for a lot of people who have that kind of legacy of Islamophobia that has been passed down for generations.
Wow, that was so interesting. Thank you so much, Mustafa. I feel like we definitely forget, when you see public discussions around the whys of Islamophobia, it all tends to be very, caught in the moment of what's happening right now. And we forget that obviously Islam was the historical other, if you go back to things like, Edward Said's Orientalism and the construction of the West in opposition to the East, and the ways in which that continues to inform the way we think of Islam as societies here in Europe, even though I guess the issue is that most people in Europe today might not necessarily think of Europe as a Christian Europe, constructed against a Muslim East, and yet we do live in the sort of continuity of that construct. So thank you so much for that. I wanted to bring Emel in at this point, if possible, to touch on the one of the issues that you raised, which was around the far right. And obviously Germany has had, you know, a very high profile attacks by far right members on individual Muslims, and obviously a history, you know, a very dark history at the heart of Europe with regards to the far right. Where does the far right fit into the conversation on Islamophobia? And I ask this because partly as a French Muslim myself, I feel that the far right obviously gets pointed at as the problem. And obviously it does peddle a lot of Islamophobic tropes. But really, for me, as I see it, the problem is the appropriation of far-right tropes and narratives by mainstream politicians, so that they then essentially start to have a veneer of legitimacy, which if they were just expounded by the far right, we'd say, well, it's, you know, that's just the far right. But as soon as kind of, you know, a foreign minister or an interior minister or the prime minister himself starts to use language that taps into Islamophobic tropes about kind of, you know, the idea that European populations are being replaced, the great replacement, which, you know, some of you might be familiar with, the sort of trope that somehow, you know, Muslims or people of color in general are out to outnumber white Christian Europeans in some sort of nativist birth derived plot that we've all sort of sat in on and agreed on, even though we can't agree on how we all pray or which mosques we should be in or anything else, but we've definitely all agreed on that one. Anyway, Emel, over to you. I've said enough.
Thank you, Myriam. That gives me the wonderful chance to share with you my personal opinion that Islamophobia is not a social problem. I believe Islamophobia is a wonderful instrument to open up space for certain topics, for fears, and in order to attain certain goals, political goals. I agree with Imam Ali. He mentioned the power of fear and how it is instrumentalized or set as an instrument, applied as an instrument in the war of perceptions. I think this is very true. I would recommend everyone to look into the last interview of Zygmunt Bauman, which he gave to Al Jazeera just before he passed away. And I'm so grateful to God that this happened, because he explains us this phenomenon very successfully and very clearly, I think. Where does today the war take place, and through by which means? And I think fear installed in the perception of people play a great role when it comes to Islamophobia. And this is, of course, one thing which the far right party of Germany, Alternative for Germany, has discovered and has started to implement successfully. When I think about Pegida or the community, organizing big demonstrations, partly demonstrations when violence taking place and attacks taking place and hate crime. These are all very good examples for instrumentalizing fear and manipulating people through fear. Therefore, my suggestion would be for all of us to try to defeat Islamophobia by Islam. When I look at all the talks in Germany or in different parts of the world, mostly we have people talking about Islamophobia. So Islamophobia makes the agenda, but not Islam. I think this is something very ironic in my eyes. And I often come across with people, when I think about my colleagues, when I think about people from the church, I really have good relations with and I cooperate with in different projects as an educator. I notice how much information is missing there regarding our beautiful religion. I've been living in this country, to name a very, maybe striking example from my bio. I've been living in this country for about 30 years now. And I do fast during Ramadan. There is no Ramadan. I have not been approached and asked by my German friends, colleagues, if I would only eat but drink water. And when I say no, I do not eat, I do not drink. So they say, but is this not something very unhealthy? And my answer is, well, I've been living here for the last 30 years. I've been fasting. And it's very evident that you always meet me. So I have survived. This is something I'm asking to myself, why? This is, I think, just because there is a big lack of information, knowledge about our beautiful religion, Islam. So I am for the fact that we should defeat Islamophobia through Islam, making Islam the agenda. I think this is something which is missing very much in Germany. And this is why far-right party or other extremist organizations find enough space for them to gain high profiles in the political discourse.
Thank you so much. I think that's a really interesting point, that Islamophobia finds a lot of recourse, but when you actually want to talk about the place that Islam might have as a faith that may have a contribution to make to our societies outside of discussions around terrorism, that is a lot more resistance to that idea. And yet that's sort of the point, right? That's like the 99.9% bit of our faith. Imam Shamsi Ali, can I bring you in at this stage? Because I think you raised something that I'm sure a lot of people felt maybe a little tense around, the idea that actually, in some cases, you mentioned you felt Muslims were responsible for the perceptions that other people have. I know that's a view that a lot of people do share, that there's, Muslims are behaving badly, and that, therefore we can expect a backlash, or we can expect people to have a negative perception. I suppose the counter argument maybe would be to say, there's such a decontextualized understanding of anything that happens when we talk about Muslim violence specifically. White violence is allowed a backdrop, it's allowed a mental health assessment, it's allowed an understanding of, geopolitical conflicts or internal turmoil, or just, men being men, which is often what I think is the analysis of white shooters. This, poor sexually frustrated man ended up just taking out his rage. And yet none of the sort of deeper introspection we afford to white shooters or white criminals tends to be afforded to kind of the assessment of why individual Muslims or group of Muslims might be undertaking the actions that they do. I mean, where do you situate the primary blame for Islamophobia? Where's the why for you?
Thank you so very much. I would like to thank Imam Mustafa for such a wonderful, presentation about historical background of Islamophobia, and I'm truly learning a lot about from that. I just wanted to say that this is one of the important points in terms of Islamophobia. There is an historic phobia here. Just to give you an example, that before the pandemic, I was in 9 European countries, visiting 9 European countries, including Serbia, Slovakia, Germany. I was there, Emel, in your country. But I was not in London, by the way. So when I was in Slovakia, Bratislava, I wanted to order a Turkish coffee. So I said, can I have that Turkish coffee? And someone told me, no, don't mention Turkish coffee here. So what should I say? Say special coffee instead of Turkish coffee. So the word Turkish itself is kind of scary to some because of the history. in that area about Al-Islam. Now, thank you, Sister Amal, about the importance of challenging Islamophobia through Islam. And that's what I used to say, that the best way to tackle Islamophobia is through da'wah. And da'wah is not speeches, but the most important, effective and important part of da'wah is action. And so we need to present ourselves. And that's what I mean, that sometimes when we talk about the factors of Islamophobia, we must not overlook ourselves, that we may be a factor of that Islamophobia. And particularly when I mention about us living in the so-called Western society, and even the word West here is debatable, what is the meaning of Western and what's the meaning of Eastern? Is it geographical or it is demographical? Because, when you say geographic, in fact, New Zealand is considered Western, Australia is considered Western. So what does it mean for the people to claim to be Western? There is a phobia, there is a racism involved in this, basically in this dichotomy, world dichotomy, by the way. So coming back again, the question is how to, to see all these situations when we come to a lot of accusations about Muslims. And yes, of course, first of all, we acknowledge our shortcomings. There is no doubt about that, you mentioned, I think Myriam mentioned that the huge majority of the victims of ISIS or even so-called Al-Qaeda are Muslims themselves. In Afghanistan, in the Middle East, huge majority of Muslims themselves. But rather than, blaming Al-Qaeda, oftentimes Islam is blamed. Islam is blamed. It's not only about violence here. The unfairness towards this religion is so deep. Take for example, female circumcisions. They call it genital mutilations. The largest country that is practicing female circumcision is Ethiopia. Ethiopia, an African country, happened to be, of course, there are Muslims there, but it's not known as a Muslim country. But still, Islam is accused here. So the point here that there is a deep unfairness in terms of targeting the Muslims, and I think it is just clear here. Even when you come to the history of Islamic studies in the Western society, the Islamic studies in the Western society in the past used to be known either Middle Eastern studies or Orientalism. Now, why it is not called Islamic studies? Why it is called Middle Eastern? Because the people wanted to say, Islam is the religion of Middle East. Nothing wrong with that. Alhamdulillah, we have our brothers and sisters Muslims in the Middle East. But the connotations here is that Middle East is a place where wars and lacking of human rights, lacking of women respect, lacking of freedom, and so on and so forth. And that's what Islam is all about. Now, what is the meaning of Oriental religion? Islam is the religion of Oriental people. It's non-Western, as I mentioned earlier. So again, a lot of things to say about this, but I think we had to be courageous to present our faith, as Amal mentioned very clearly, that this is the way to tackle Islamophobia. Just live our life as Muslims. Just live our life as Muslims. And I mean, the Islamic terminology is just do da'wah by your action. Be a part, as I mentioned earlier, be a part of the mainstream society in a positive term. I think integration is a positive way to represent that. We need to integrate even faster into the mainstream society, not to assimilate, because we are part of, let's say, a British community, but we are Muslims, by the way. We are part of American community, but we are Muslims. And that's the meaning of integration. So take part in a public life, become politician, take part in the market, take part in economy, take part in education, like Amal, for example. That is the way to tackle Islamophobia.
Thank you, Imam Shamsi Ali. Zara, can I bring you in at this point on this idea of, firstly, the why? I'd obviously love to hear your why, and obviously a reaction maybe to some of the points raised by Imam Shamsi Ali, because here in the UK, where we both are situated, there is a lot of conversation around the idea that, the issue is integration. If only, Muslims understood, quote unquote, British values better, if only, Muslims spoke more English, if only Muslim women were more active in the labor force, if only there were more efforts being made than the problem of Islamophobia would be resolved by the victims of Islamophobia themselves. Over to you, Zara.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good and interesting perspective from everybody. And I think it's great to understand nothing happens in a vacuum, and there is a historical context and point. Because I think if you look at it right now, you know, the number of Islamophobic incidents and hate crime in Europe is growing. And you saw that with the terrorist attacks in Dover. So Islamophobia is also conflated with xenophobia and anti-migrant views. And so a lot of people see Brexit as less brown people coming over, not necessarily Eastern Europeans. We were all kind of packaged into that. So I think at the root of the issue, as Imam did identify, is, you know, it's this othering which continues to permeate. So you can never be British enough. We never, you know, how many qualifications, you know. And the other part of it is, well, how much ownership do we take of this issue? Islamophobia won't be eradicated by Muslims. It's got to be eradicated by all of society, saying this is a societal evil that, just like racism, we're against this. And so I think it's also that question of, well, who controls the narrative and who decides the story and how we tell the story. And I was thinking in it, you know, upon my election and the framing that I was being put into, I thought, well, they're defining us without us, you know. Who defines who is a British Muslim today? And guess what? We're very diverse. We don't all wear headscarves. We are from all different cultures and ethnicities and backgrounds. And young people themselves have so many different identities. And I think that point about integration, well, actually, it's just not good enough here in our British context, because, well, what are we not doing to get involved? Of course, there's going to be pockets of the community that are more insular, but that goes both ways. There are places in England that are very white, and, you know, we've had a lot of refugees settle there. And I was on a discussion, and one of the ladies, what was the first time we've ever saw someone, you know, from the Black community in that village or whatever. They just had not seen anybody foreign before, you know, or Syrian communities, the first time they've ever engaged in that. But I think to say that this has to be resolved by us is not correct. We're always going to have to bear some of it, but ultimately, just like other types of hate crime, discrimination, all of society has to decide what is good for society and what is not. And I think this idea that, you know, at third generation, fourth generation, it's going to go on. So we found in, for example, putting aside some of the Islamophobic stuff that you see visually, 500,000 people more in the British Muslim community are in some of the most socially immobile, you know, the poorest boroughs and councils in the UK. So we also suffer from latent health inequalities and poor social mobility. So you're also talking about marginalization when it comes to economic capital and empowerment, you know. And so we've got lots of our own challenges, but there's so much more onus of, well, what are Muslim communities doing about this, that, and the other? And so I think the framing isn't right. I think we need to push back by reframing. And so what causes it is really poor media narratives that will see the first sign of terrorism, you know, connecting it to Muslim communities. Well, on the other side of it is when we had 2 terror attacks, David Amos, Liverpool, you know, mosques have a big surge in hate crime, and the first to be attacked are Muslim women. So you have politicians, you know, Boris and his famous, you know, letterboxes, and you got political rhetoric that actually has a knock-on impact on everyday Muslims. So I don't think it's the onus is on us. It is going to be our issue as it impacts us, but we have to build civil society relationships. We have to have allyship, and we have to have people doing the right thing and not passive bystanders, but active participants. And I think there is a wave of young people with both an American, a European, a British, Muslim identity saying, well, no, I'm not going to be reframed. I'm not going to continue this paradigm that I'm an ethnic, you know, I'm from a cultural background. Actually, that's not who I am. So I think it's about us redefining, challenging, being advocates, but also recognizing that all of society has to be with us on this, because otherwise, and I'll finish on this point, why is my citizenship about my contribution to society? Who else has that test? So I'm a good citizen because I do lots of charity work, or I'm contributing, or well, does Gary down the road have to do that to be a good citizen? No. Why is my so that's the false narrative, that to be good, we have to always be contributing, but it's not fair because not everybody else has that test. So that's why the integration topic, I think, in some ways can also be a slippery slope into, we are then again in a category of, we've got conditions to being good citizens, as opposed to just default, yeah, we're part of society. So anyway, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Zara. Yeah, and I guess picking up on that, I'm also interested in the idea of integration into what, you know, cultures to me are evolving. They're not static entities. We're all of us involved in the construction of an ever-evolving meaning of what our culture is, what it stands for, what our values are. And I sort of feel like integration conversations often feel to me like there is a kind of two-tier societal status, you know, the societal status of those that behold the culture, which is to me a form of nativism, and then those who have to kind of integrate into that and who therefore don't necessarily get a say in its definitions or constructions. And I just, to me, that doesn't even feel true when I look at culture more generally. I'm like, who are the people, you know, putting out the arts, the culture, the vibrancy, the stuff that's making our, you know, very kind of on the way out country, sorry, that is my perception of the UK right now, vibrant is in any way, you know, it's not necessarily obvious that it's sort of the so-called people who adhere to a nativist dialogue or identity that are pushing the country forward in a way that makes it aspirational or interesting or culturally relevant. Anyway, I'll park my thoughts on that. I do want to bring in the audience, but before I do that, please have your questions on the ready. I would like to just go around and ask everyone if you could just to end it maybe on a slightly more positive note, or maybe a kind of inspirational note. What are some of the strategies that you have found personally effective in tackling Islamophobia? When I say personally, it could be through your institutions, it could be through your individual day-to-day life, but what are some of the ways that you actually have found that, you know, there's a lot of different views on how that should be done, maybe kind of a couple of strategies each that people might find helpful or useful for their different contexts. Maybe I could start with you, Imam Shamsi Ali, if that's all right, and then I'll come to the audience. So have your questions ready, guys. You can start popping them into the chat.
All right, thank you very much. I think the issue of integration have been discussed quite intensely on the chat. What I mean integration here is become a part with our own particularity. You know, the Quran says, "Huwa alladhi ba'atha fil ummiyina rasulan minhum." He is Allah, the one who sent a messenger from among themselves. It means we have to be a messenger from among themselves. And that's the meaning, we have to be a part of the mainstream, but with our own particularity. And that's what I mean, be a part of British, but you're Muslims, be a part of American, but you're Muslims. And I think that point will boost our even self-confidence, you know, to be a part of the society. And because we feel that we are part of it, we own it. We are not guests, you know. We are not guests, because there are some Muslims, particularly the immigrants who have come to this country, you know, they change their passport, but they don't change their mentality. And that's what the problem is. And so coming back to the last point is, I think there are two things. Number one, you know, I just I'd like to mention basically, when the 9/11 happened here in New York City, I was only 5 years, you know, being the city, but I really tried to do my best to change what was going on at the time. And one of the things that I did was reaching out to our partners, to interfaith partners. So interfaith dialogue, I think, is one of the effective way of changing Islamophobia. We don't mean to learn our deen, our religion from others, but here we present ourselves that we are here partners for good, not as a threat. And you know, one of the books that I co-author basically with Jewish rabbis is called Sons of Abraham, Issues That Divide Jews and Muslims, that have been translated into 5 languages right now. You know, it is truly a very effective way, because in time that we are facing tremendous challenge in America during, let's say, Donald Trump, when he wanted to ban the Muslim to enter the United States, many of those non-Muslims stood to our side and defend us. You know, possibly, if not the largest, one of the largest rally demonstrations we organized here in this country was the rally called Today I'm a Muslim Too. Over 10,000 people in Times Square gathered to say, today I am a Muslim too. Mostly non-Muslim, 90% of those people attended this rally were non-Muslim, Jews, Christians, Hindus, Buddhists, to say I'm a Muslim too. And that's, I think, the result of that interfaith engagement. So that's the only point for myself, and there are many things, of course, but I think other speakers can contribute.
Thank you so much, Imam Shamsi Ali. Mustafa, can I bring you in here? What are your views on the best strategies for tackling Islamophobia? Oh, Mustafa.
I feel as though the best strategies for tackling Islamophobia, other than what Imam Shamsi suggested in terms of interaction with the community, is just education. I feel as though once we educate people and we seek to educate ourselves in a better way, then we can function in society by enlightening people. So, for example, when we look at the example of the Prophet ﷺ, whenever he encountered a kind of negative attribute in the people around him, in terms of xenophobia, in terms of racism, in terms of not liking people for arbitrary things like their phenotype or their country of origin, he never called it racism, or he never called it Islamophobia, or he never called it anything other than jahiliyyah, ignorance. And so the only cure for ignorance is knowledge. And this is experiential knowledge, as well as book knowledge and information. So allowing people to not only understand the historical narratives and things that inform their views, but then also allowing people to interact with you, as Allah says in the Quran, وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا, that He made us into different tribes and nations in order for us to come to know each other. So in us coming to know each other and understand each other and making ways easier for that to happen, that can get rid of the jahiliyyah, the ignorance that causes us to have these kind of negative ways of interacting with each other, in my opinion.
Thank you so much, Mustafa. Emma, over to you.
Thank you. Personally, I believe that living in accordance with the understanding of taqwa as a Muslim woman would be the first seed to plant in this project. I am for the idea that we all can, regardless of where we live, what we do, and whom we interact with, we all can see ourselves as one big multiplicator in this project. I have the advantage that I'm an educator. Every day I go into classrooms with several students, and every student leaving my course with a question mark in mind is a big success for me. So this is what I have defined as a personal project for myself, and in the role of a multiplicator. This is a very micro thing, but I believe in the power of micro projects. One day a drop may become an ocean. So I would like to invite everyone to such projects, micro projects in their own environment.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. We'll come back to some of those actually. Zara, over to you. What are some of the strategies you at the MCB have found to be particularly effective?
Well, touching on what some of the others have said, I think definitely engagement is really critical. So facilitating positive relationship building. So I shared the Visit My Mosque project in the chat there. So offering people a bridge to better understanding is really positive. So we do that. And there's also Islamophobia Awareness Month in November. And this year, the first year of UN Day to combating Islamophobia on the 15th of March. So I think where there's occasions and opportunities to facilitate better understanding, dialogue and allyship, we should do that. I think the second thing is to really knock hard on the challenges, the stereotyping and portrayal of Muslims in the media. So directly challenging that, putting complaints in, working with journalists, which we do in the Centre for Media Monitoring, and calling it out is really, really critical. And then I think supporting Muslim communities to actively participate in civil society. But that comes with the caveat that we know that there's barriers to doing that. So it's not just all on us, but I think, as everybody said, we have to be actively participating in this too. And that's why having an umbrella organization like the Muslim Council of Britain and coordinating, whether it's getting involved in the political party election process, local council elections, but also writing to your MP on key issues that are important. I think using the system and the processes are really critical, but understanding that, you know, our communities are still young communities and there is still change and challenge within that. So amongst ourselves, we're still developing. So I think often we have this view that we've got to do everything tomorrow, but I think it's going to take time. So there is still those, even within ourselves, divisions between young and old, generational changes, but also I think being confident and bold. And the final point I'd say is that, you know, in 2021, we marked, you know, the 20-year anniversary of 9/11. And I said, well, isn't it about time we raise our heads now and we be confident to be who we are? And some of the interviews I've taken on about some, you know, LBC with Ian Dale, I did it because I feel like now is our time to take those interviews, to have those difficult conversations, but not to be afraid, because whether people like it or not, we are here. And most people actually want to live in a good society with their neighbors and with their friends. And we have a kind of hostile side. There's a fringe that are dedicated to work against us, but there is there's a big middle ground of people who just want to understand better. And they're asking the question, how can we help? So I think whether it's local relationships, what you do in your workplace, or whether it's on the international and national space, there's scope for conversation and dialogue, but we can't be passive in the conversation. Nothing is going to change unless we keep pushing, but we can't do it alone. And I think that's the philosophy we should continue to be open, but confident to challenge as well.
Thank you so much, Zara, and to all of the participants for your points there on the strategy to tackle Islamophobia. We've had loads of great questions. One that I want to kind of group together relates to something you've just touched on, Zara, and actually others also, this idea of alliances and whether or not, I think Muslim communities have always been pretty good at reaching out to other interfaith communities, but some people are saying as we live in communities that are increasingly defining themselves as non-faith communities, do we need to be doing more work with people that are outside of a religious framework? And I suppose the question might be, you know, interfaith sets itself up as a pretty straightforward basis for dialogue, right? There's something that we share and that is faith, and that's a basis for us to communicate. What does that communication look like when we're engaging with non-faith communities, and what would be some of the advice that you'd offer to people who do want to engage beyond the interfaith setup? And we've also had Christelle here asking, how do we non-Muslims help fight Islamophobia, she says. So I would love for the panelists to kind of jump in and give us some views. Does anyone want to jump in on that immediately, or should I pick someone out?
Yeah, I can answer it.
Oh, go ahead, Zara. Go ahead.
I'll go short. And then, I mean, look, I think we have to work with everybody, and that's what we've been doing. And I think it's on the basis of human rights and building positive civil society. So even when we're asked difficult questions, you know, we say, well, look, we live in a pluralistic society. Everybody has, you know, their faith, their belief, their understanding, or no faith at all. But at the end of the day, that doesn't change how we work together, because if people are being marginalized, that impacts everybody. You know, in the UK, for example, Irish communities face very similar challenges to Muslim communities today. So I think how we do that is on the basis of human rights, civil liberties, justice, and those kinds of things that we all agree on. And whilst we say, you know, we respect others, we would hope that others would also respect our views and religious expression. And I think the great thing about COVID was you saw so many faith institutions opening doors, providing a lifeline of support. And, you know, Muslim communities are some of the most charitable, you know, so I think that in itself is a great way for people to work together. I visited in places in the north of England where there were, you know, food banks just set up between faith communities to support the wider community and delivering packaging. So I think there's plenty to do in the community, particularly on social issues and social change. And then on the point, what was the second point? Sorry, Myriam, about, oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, that's embarrassing for the host, isn't it? It was Christelle asking about this idea of what non-Muslims can do. You know, what can be your sort of non-Muslim strategies for helping address Islamophobia?
And I think that's firstly to understand some of the issues that Muslims face, and there's an education piece there, but also it's to call it out when you do see it. And I think those are two critical things. But I'll pass it over to our next panel and maybe add a bit more to that.
Thank you. Emel, you wanted to jump in on that one?
I would simply say break silence. Don't be silent. Create curiosity for Muslims, for Muslim culture, and for Islam. If you have not acquired knowledge about this religion, please go ahead and be curious and read and ask. And after you have acquired knowledge, share this knowledge. Basically, plant a seed. Define your seed and plant a seed.
I just wanted to take on what Sister Zara mentioned about the interfaith means human connection, inter-engagement. What we mean here basically is inter-community, and the word faith itself. Those people who claim to be not believing in any particular religion, they have faith. And so that's what we mean interfaith. You know, when we come to the Quran, and I think Imam Mustafa mentioned, Ya ayyuhan nas, Allah begins that with the ayyuhan nas. You know, we created you from a male and a female, and we make you into many nations and tribes so that you get to know one another. It began with Ya ayyuhan nas, and it means humans. So the foundation of dialogue, ta'aruf here, is humanity. And our humanity basically is the strongest connection that we have between us as people, and that's what we do in the field. I am an interfaith activist in New York and beyond, and I have a lot of people who claim they don't believe in a particular faith, but they come to our to the mosque. They wanted to work with us. They join our activities as a part of that human expression. You know, just a few weeks ago, we organized what we call midnight run, that is feeding homeless, after midnight. And we have Jews, Christians, Muslims, and also those people who claim do not affiliate to any particular faith, tradition, or religion. And in fact, the largest group of people in the world today are those who claim don't have religion. You know, the fourth largest. And so you have Christians, if you combine Catholic and Protestant, and then Muslims, and then the third one, basically, the third largest, and then Hinduism. You know, so we have to work with everybody. As non-Muslims wanted to help in combating Islamophobia, I think the best is, just learn about our faith, have more confidence in what we believe in, and become our friends. I think that's the best way to combat Islamophobia.
Thank you so much. Mustafa, did you want to jump in on that, or should I throw you one of the next questions we've got?
Inshallah, I'll take one of the next questions. I feel as though my co-panelists adequately answered those. Alhamdulillah.
Of course. So we have one here says, the war on terror is undoubtedly still having a detrimental effect to this day on Muslim communities around the world. How can we undo this on the grand scale in the political field? What do you think, Mustafa? What are your views on that one?
Oh, okay, you're giving that one to me.
Say that with glee.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. Honestly, I feel as though, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, of course. It's to do with, I guess, the war on terror still having a detrimental effect on Muslim communities around the world. And I guess it comes back to the idea of strategies for undoing this in the political field specifically. What do you think needs to happen there?
I mean, it's very difficult for us as individuals to combat state propaganda and to combat mass media propaganda and to combat, an entire industry and an entire system that's built to portray people in a certain way as a result of certain negative, things that have happened in order to push certain political agendas. Like, it's a big ask for us as, grassroots individuals to be able to take on a system, but it is possible. I feel like there are two ways to do it. One, through community engagement in terms of grassroots activism, grassroots raising of political awareness and campaigning and lobbying and all of those kind of things that we see happening. And then in another aspect as well, more political engagement with Muslims. One of the co-panelists, for example, is, I don't know her exact title, so I don't want to get it wrong, but was elected first female and first Scot and youngest Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Britain. And through that organization, she was able to, you know, engage directly with the government, with politicians, with media houses, and with all of these things. So if we see more and more people like that being raised in our community, I feel as though they can make a positive impact in terms of representation and in terms of presenting an alternative that can sway the narrative.
And can I add to that?
Please do. I mean, this is something that you know a lot about. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's such an important question because really we are feeling the ramifications of 20 years of a complete strategy and securitization of Muslims globally. And what I think is so important, and I saw some of the chat about people have been targeted, whether they're in Germany or France, is we have to evidence what is happening. We have to evidence it, because many people say, well, is Islamophobia even real? Or are Muslims really targeted? How do you know? Is it just a feeling? And I think evidence is so important. And we've got the analysis on media, we've got the analysis on discrimination, but even at a European, I think being organized is really important, and having structures are really important, but also us being part of the political system and being very visible and having voices, not just Muslims, but also non-Muslims, speaking on behalf of these issues are really critical. And I think you can call a spade is so integral, but I think evidence-based arguments are so important that, you know, well, why is this the experience of Muslims? Why are these health inequalities happening? And the war on terror, you know, is such a huge construct. But I do agree with Mustafa that it's not impossible to overcome, particularly because we've got new generations of Muslims who have a much more complex identity, but also they're articulate and they're born in the state. And so what do you do with them? They're not foreigners, they don't have a different cultural complex. So, and I think it's really critical that actually young people are empowered to know how to enter this public space and how to push for a change. But again, we shouldn't do that alone. And I think we should know we're in it for the long game. It's not going to change overnight. It's 20 years of that. And we've got much further to go.
And you've seen, obviously, for yourself, Zara, being kind of part of the young generation coming up off the back of generations of previous public speakers, you know, visibly Muslim public speakers trying to challenge institutionalized Islamophobia, that it's still so hard not to kind of be bogged down into sort of constructed conversations that don't serve why it is that we want to be present in the public arena. We do only have a few minutes left, so I'd really love to go around and ask everyone to use a few minutes just to talk about one thing that they wish everybody knew that they think might help counter Islamophobia in some way. So what is it? What is one thing you sort of think, if I just genuinely wish everyone understood this one thing? And when I say that, I do want to make a small caveat, which is I personally think, just like racism, for me, Islamophobia is a form of racism, because obviously race is a construct. So it's very similarly a construct. But what I'm getting at is that racism and Islamophobia can both be individual prejudice, but it can also be institutional discrimination. So when I say, what is one thing you wish everybody knew in order to better tackle Islamophobia, I don't necessarily just mean individual facts about Islam. Maybe there's something that we should all be aware of institutionally that also might help us challenge that. So I'm going to throw that out there. I'm going to begin with you, Imam Shamsi Ali, if that's okay.
I think I just wanted to underline once again the importance of understanding that Islamophobia is not new, is an ongoing, and looks that the only way to tackle it is by preparing ourselves. So the main point is with us. And I think Emel repeatedly mentioned that, also Zara mentioned a lot. the importance of engagement. Yes, in the United States of America, despite that there is an improvement in terms of Americans' view of Islam, but Islamophobia is visible. Ilhan Omar, who is a member of the Congress, recently, gave up of her position as the member of the Foreign Relation Committee. That is a form, because if it's not because she's a black, yes, of course she's a black from Ethiopia, from Somalia. She is an immigrant, she is a female, but there are some other blacks, female, and immigrant on the other side. But why she is targeted? Because she's a Muslim. So I think we have to understand that clearly.
Fantastic, thank you. Can I hand over to you, Emel, on that one? What was one thing you wish everybody knew about Islamophobia, or
Sure.
to help them tackle it? Yeah.
I wish a lot of people would know that wearing hijab for Muslim women is a sign of emancipation and evidence of feminism. I can underline this from my experience in Turkey. Lots of female students were banned to study in different universities 20 years ago. I personally took part in demonstrations in order to protect their rights. Then when I was back in Istanbul studying economics, also, I wish lots of people would know about the valuable work of Muslim scientists in the field of medicine, in the field of mathematics, in the field of astronomy, and that most of their precious books are translated by the Western world. And some of the originals are there to be seen in UK libraries. I think that would throw in a very different perspective, as well as a different energy in people's minds.
Absolutely, completely agree with that. Can I throw over to you, Mustafa, on this one? What's one thing, I'm sure there's lots of things that you wish people knew, but what if I had to pin you down to one, what would you say?
Just how interconnected we all actually are, and the fact that a lot of our histories, a lot of our struggles, a lot of our achievements, a lot of our high points and low points historically all interlink. And so if we keep that in mind when we interact with each other, we can have better interactions that would make society a better place for all of us to live in, if we understand that we're all not different and not separate, but we're all the same in different ways.
Thank you so much. I think about that a lot, because obviously our religion is a religion of oneness. And I think that, it's like we often are so focused on the individual issues that we forget that really crucial point ultimately, that is, we understand our individualness in order to better connect us to our oneness in theory, right, as Muslims. And I think sometimes we get stuck on the individual separateness sometimes and don't take the step beyond that, which is I personally believe is what our faith calls us to. Zara, we're going to hand over to you for the last point on this. I'm sure there's lots of things you could tell us, but if there was one thing that the audience here could take away and say, if there's one thing that people that we wish everybody knew, what would it be?
I think that Muslims are incredibly diverse. I mean, just one mosque that I visited in Liverpool said they serve over 50 countries, Muslims from over 50 countries. I think we need to break the thinking that we're all one big homogenous group, thinks the same, does the same, and that's based on the front page of the Daily Mail, So I think, take a second thought at the idea that actually the groups that we're talking about are diverse communities that within themselves are very, very diverse, culturally, in their traditions, even in their approaches to religion. And whilst they're unified on the fundamentals, they're coming from all different backdrops and places, but they're part of society, and there is no secret plot, just also to confirm that. But actually that there is a willingness and a real desire, just like everybody else, to be normalized, to do the things we need to do, to have normal, most people are not in the political realm, they're not politically active and engaged, but they are diverse. So the more we keep creating this block that Muslims are one kind of identity, the worse it's going to be in actually helping challenge the issues that we need to, because we're limited by our own bias and presumptions. So many people wouldn't expect a Scottish accent coming out of me today. But guess what? There's loads of Muslims in Scotland and in Ireland and in Wales. And, you know, so I think if we can really open our minds to the idea that Muslims are just as diverse and different as everybody else, I think we'll be able to tackle and approach the problem that they face, but also to embrace that that's a great thing. And that's a welcome thing too. And with that comes lots of positives. So I'm hoping, and that's kind of my philosophy in the Muslim Council of Britain, to really reflect that diversity as well. Because irrespective of how religious you are or not, we're still faced with the same challenges because of our Muslim identity.
Amazing. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for their fantastic contributions. I hope you learned as much as I did today. I really, really appreciated all of those insights. We could have gone on so much longer about all of those, but Imam, Shamsi, Ali, Emel, Zara, Mustafa, thank you all for being a part of this. Thank you to all of the contributors, to all of those of you who've attended the panel today, to Kaysra, to all of the people behind the scenes making Macfest happen. We're grateful to all of you, and thank you for being a part of today. All good is from God and all errors are definitely mine. Take care and Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much, Myriam. That was a terrific discussion. We loved it. Really honored to have you all here, joining two people from America, one lady from Germany, Katarzyna from France, and of course, our own Myriam and Zara from Scotland and Myriam from London. What an amazing, amazing panel. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure people have learned a lot. There's a lot to be thought through and learn from, and I'm taking away really positive vibes. Now, if you enjoyed that, please join Myriam again. She will be taking part in her own panel on 6th of March as part of the International Women Week, where she talks about her life being a Muslim, about her new work, about, you know, everything else she does, amazing work. And then, of course, tonight at 6 o'clock, we've got comedy. So from Islamophobia to comedy with Prince Abdi, Somali comedian, and a Pakistani woman called Nabila. Please, please do join us. That's at 6 o'clock. I think Katarzyna has posted a link, and we'd love to see you there. So we've finished our weekend festival this week. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Have a lovely day. Bye all.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.